Climate models are based on well-documented physical processes to simulate the transfer of energy and materials through the climate system. Climate models are also known as general circulation models or global climate models, or GCMs, and they use mathematical equations to characterize how energy and matter interact in different parts of the ocean, atmosphere, and land. Building and running a climate model is a complex process of identifying and quantifying Earth system processes, representing them with mathematical equations, setting variables to represent what we call initial conditions and subsequent changes in climate forcing, and repeatedly solving the equations using powerful supercomputers. Over the next few slides, we'll talk about those different steps that go into running a climate model. As you can see from the figure below, climate models have evolved quite a bit since they first started in the 1960s. By the 2010s, our climate models are able to represent many more components of the Earth system, including upper atmosphere, atmospheric chemistry, and everything down to marine ecosystems. Scientists work to build an understanding of all the factors that are known to influence the Earth's climate. As you can see in the figure here, there are a number of different factors and processes that need to be modeled inside of a climate model to understand what the conditions are at a given location. Things like changes in the atmosphere composition and circulation, changes in the hydrologic cycle, clouds, the atmosphere itself, changes in the solar input. If there's ocean and atmosphere in the same grid cell, there's potentially an interaction between the air and the sea and potentially sea ice. And among a group of a whole another set of factors. In general, each of the things that you see on the screen here are solved within a climate model at every grid cell that the climate model has. The second step that scientists do is apply that knowledge to a scaled down computer simulation of the planet called a global climate model. You can think about the planet as being represented by a number of grid cells across the entire planet, but also stacked vertically from the surface to the upper parts of the atmosphere. Climate modelers represent the Earth's surface and atmosphere as a virtual world of interacting three-dimensional boxes. You can think about it as if you built the Earth out of Legos. You would solve your equations and understand the climate at each one of those locations. The third step is that we look at the physical characteristics and processes that occur in each box that are cataloged. So in general, each grid cell may have different characteristics happening within it. It may be a cell that deals with the fact that there's ocean, ice, and sea ice to be dealt with. It may be a location that is a complex bit of terrain and different things like mountains or prairies or even lakes within that grid cell. Or we may be dealing with the fact that there are different aerosol injections and potentially volcanic activity happening at a given grid cell. The next step is that mathematical equations that represent the physical characteristics and processes in each grid box are entered and solved. So for each of the grid cells, these three main starting points are there for fundamental laws of physics. These include conservation of mass, the first law of thermodynamics, and Newton's second law, plus things like conservation of water vapor, chemical species, and so on. Of course, these are not simple equations, they're complex differential equations, and we can use them by solving them on a grid and allowing the grid cells to talk to each other with their answers throughout the model. To work with the equations that we saw on the last screen, the equations are converted into computer code and climate variables are set. Most computer code that ran climate models for a long period of time was written in what we call Fortran, one of the first computing languages that worked with punch cards and supercomputers. In general, for each grid cell, the equations are solved and information is passed between grid cell to grid cell. The next step is that a supercomputer solves all the equations, passing results to the neighboring boxes and calculating the next set of conditions. Models are then compared and refined by simulating the past climate and checking on how well the results match observations. In the figure you see here, the black trend lines in the graph show the Earth's observed mean temperature from 1870 to 2012. The red line shows the average result of many computer simulations of the Earth's past climate over that same span. As the model output begins to match real-world observations, scientists can gain more and more confidence in the understanding of the climate system and their ability to simulate how it works. The next step is that we look at models that reasonably approximate past climate, and we consider those useful for modeling future climate change. Models closest to the observations line are considered to be valid for modeling future climate change. Climate models are tested by using data from past climate records to predict known present conditions. The model uses, in this case, information from 1900 to 1920 temperatures to make projections of 1970 to 1990 temperatures. When we do this, we test and validate and increase the reliability of the predictions made by the model. In the figure you see here, the closer to the observations line that you are, the better your modeling is doing. And as you can see here with the CMIP5 information, we're relatively close to those models' average conditions. The next step is to take our climate models that have worked on historical and validated historical observations and use it to predict future climate change scenarios. So climate models are used by scientists to answer many different questions, including how the Earth's climate is changing and how it might change in the future if greenhouse gas emissions continue. Here we use different climate scenarios represented by the different color lines into the future. And we can see the observations that we have historically in the black line fall somewhere within the line of our future projections for any of the scenarios. This ends the fourth video for week 1.